My own son and his wife locked my sick wife and me in the basement of our Victorian home, screaming, "This house is ours now." Sitting in that dampness, I said to Isadora, "Hush, they don't know what's hidden behind that brick wall." When they left, I moved a loose brick and revealed to my wife a secret I had kept for 43 years, one about my true identity that will destroy everything they think they know about the Ashford name. Hello, dear listeners. Thank you for joining me today. Before I begin my story, I would be grateful if you could subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me which state or country you're listening from. It always warms my heart to see how far our stories travel. Please enjoy listening. This Victorian house has been breathing for over a century. Built in 1922 by my adoptive father, Henry Ashford, it stands proud on Drayton Street in Savannah's historic district. The morning sun filters through Spanish moss, casting dancing shadows across our wraparound porch. I have called this place home for 43 years. Isadora and I moved here as newlyweds, young and full of dreams. We raised our son Dalton within these walls, watching him take his first steps on the polished oak floors. This house witnessed our joy when he graduated, our pride when he started his business, our happiness when he brought Arabella home as his bride. But that was 3 years ago. 3 long, suffocating years since they moved in with us. It started when Isadora had her first stroke. Dalton suggested they move into the master suite upstairs to help out. "Just temporarily, Dad," he said. We moved downstairs to Henry's old study so Isadora wouldn't have to climb stairs. Temporarily became permanently. Their belongings invaded every corner. Arabella's expensive perfumes replaced Isadora's simple lavender sachets. Their loud conversations about money echoed through rooms that once knew only gentle voices. This morning started like every other. I woke before dawn to prepare Isadora's medication and fix her breakfast. She can barely speak since the second stroke, but her eyes still sparkle when I read her poems. I was making her soft scrambled eggs when Arabella appeared in the doorway. "That smell again," she said, not hiding her disgust. She wore a silk robe worth more than most people's monthly salary. "Wilder, couldn't you cook something normal? This house always smells like a nursing home." I kept stirring the eggs jaw tight. "Your mother-in-law enjoys these eggs. They're easy for her to swallow." "She's not really eating anyway." Arabella continued pouring expensive coffee. "Dr. Cross said she might need a feeding tube soon. Why pretend otherwise?" The casual cruelty in her voice made my chest tighten. This woman had never shown genuine care for Isadora. To her, my wife was just an inconvenience, an obstacle to the lifestyle she felt entitled to in our home. I carried the breakfast tray to our bedroom, where Isadora sat propped against pillows, staring at the garden we'd planted together decades ago. Her hand trembled as I helped her eat, but she managed a small smile. In that moment, surrounded by morning light and jasmine blooming outside, I felt a flicker of our old peace. But peace was a luxury we could no longer afford. The floorboards upstairs groaned under heavy footsteps. Dalton was awake, and soon he'd join Arabella in the kitchen. They'd talk in hushed tones about things they thought I couldn't hear. Property values, inheritance laws, the burden of aging parents. Their words cut deeper than they knew. As I sat beside Isadora, holding her fragile hand, I had no idea this would be our last normal morning. An hour later, the floorboards upstairs finally went still. I heard murmured voices, then the deliberate descent of footsteps along the grand staircase. Dalton appeared first in his polished navy suit, followed by Arabella in a tailored dress that probably cost more than most families spend on groceries in a month. Their entrance into the dining room carried an unsettling sense of purpose that tightened my stomach. This wasn't their usual casual drift through the house. It was orchestrated. Dalton pulled out the chair at the head of the mahogany table, Henry's old seat, before speaking in the professional, detached tone he used with clients. "Dad, we need to talk. Seriously." Arabella sat beside him, folding her manicured hands, eyes shining with that predatory glint I knew too well. They had come prepared. "It's about the house," Dalton said, still not looking at me. "With Mom's condition and everything coming, we've been thinking about the inheritance situation, the bureaucracy, the legal mess when the time comes." A coldness spread through me, not from his meaning, but from the casual way he delivered it. Arabella leaned forward, voice syrupy with false concern. "We want to help you avoid problems later. You should sign the house over to Dalton now. A simple gift deed, just a formality." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were official documents already filled out, evidence they had planned this for weeks. "The house is worth $750,000, Dalton added. This keeps us out of probate. No government interference. I didn't touch the papers. No. The word cracked through the room. Arabella's smile dropped. What do you mean? No, we're trying to help you. Do you want your only son dealing with government offices when you can't handle things? I understand everything I said, holding her gaze, and that's why the answer is no. Dalton's face reddened. We live here, take care of you, pay for Mom's medications. It's practically our house already. You live in my house, I corrected, and I take care of your mother. Dalton stood abruptly, his chair scraping. Be reasonable. Mom needs professional care. Magnolia Manor, outside Atlanta. $4,500 a month. 24-hour staff. You could visit weekends. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. They had already researched places, already planned our removal from our own home. You want to warehouse us, I said quietly. We want what's best for everyone, Arabella snapped. You're being selfish. Dalton has a right to this house. He carries the Ashford name. Something dark flickered in Dalton's eyes. Enough. I'm done arguing. He grabbed my arm, not painfully, but with authority, and dragged me toward the basement door. At 72, I couldn't match his strength. Dalton, what are you doing? I shouted. This is our house now, he roared, shoving me toward the steep stairs. The door slammed, the bolt locked. In the darkness, only my ragged breathing and Isadora's frightened whimper remained. We were prisoners in our own home. The basement was a tomb of forgotten memories. Cold stone walls pressed in around us, and the musty smell of decades-old dampness filled my lungs. The only light came from a thin crack under the door above, casting everything in eerie twilight. Isadora trembled beside me on the rough wooden steps. Her breathing was shallow and labored, each exhale a small cloud in the chilly air. I wrapped my arm around her frail shoulders, feeling how much weight she'd lost since the second stroke. Her body felt as delicate as autumn leaves. It's going to be all right, sweetheart, I whispered, though the words felt hollow in this concrete prison. They'll come to their senses soon. But then I heard the sound that shattered my hope. Car doors slamming, an engine starting, the crunch of gravel as they backed out of our driveway. Dalton and Arabella were leaving us here locked in our own basement like discarded furniture. The silence that followed was deafening. No footsteps above, no voices, just the steady drip of condensation and Isadora's frightened breathing. We were completely alone. Hours crawled by, my legs cramped from sitting on the hard steps, but I didn't dare move far from Isadora. She dozed fitfully against my shoulder, occasionally jerking awake with small sounds of confusion. Each time I smoothed her gray hair and murmured reassurances, I didn't believe myself. The basement hadn't been used for storage in years. Cobwebs draped the corners like funeral shrouds, and empty mason jars lined forgotten shelves. This was where Henry used to keep his wine collection back when this house hosted elegant dinner parties. Now it felt like a crypt. As darkness deepened outside, the crack of light under the door grew dimmer. Soon we'd be in complete blackness. The thought terrified me, not for myself, but for Isadora. In her confused state, total darkness might send her into panic. That's when I remembered Henry's words. I was 18 when he brought me down here, just months after adopting me from the state orphanage. He'd been showing me where the water shut off, was explaining the old electrical system. But then he'd stopped at the far wall, the one made of rough fieldstone. Wilder, he'd said, his voice unusually serious, there's something here you need to know about. Something for the most desperate of times. His weathered hand had pressed against one particular stone. Your real father taught me that a man should always have a final card to play. Promise me you'll remember this place. I'd been young and distracted, more interested in starting my new life than dwelling on old secrets. But now, 43 years later, those words echoed with crystal clarity. Desperate times. If this wasn't desperate, what was? Isadora, honey, I need to check something, I whispered, helping her lean against the stair railing. Stay right here. I'll be just a few feet away. I stood on shaking legs and made my way carefully across the uneven floor. Old furniture loomed like sleeping giants in the gloom. I bumped into a forgotten rocking chair, stubbed my toe on a wooden crate, but kept moving toward the back wall. The fieldstone foundation felt rough and cold under my palms. I ran my hands along the surface, searching for anything unusual. Most of the stones were mortared solidly in place, but then my fingers found what I was looking for. One stone was different from the others. It moved slightly under pressure, as if it had been carefully loosened and replaced countless times over the decades. My heart pounded as I pressed harder, feeling it give way with a soft grinding sound. The stone slid inward, revealing a dark cavity behind it. I reached into the hidden space, my fingers trembling with anticipation and fear. What I found was small, rectangular, and cold to the touch. Carefully I pulled it out, an old tobacco tin, the kind popular when I was a child. Its surface was tarnished with age, but I could still make out faded letters, Lucky Strike. "What is it?" Isadora's voice was barely a whisper from across the basement. "I'm not sure yet, sweetheart." I called back, though my pulse quickened. Whatever Henry had hidden here, it was important enough to keep secret for over 4 decades. I made my way back to the steps, clutching the tin like a lifeline. Then I remembered Henry's old toolbox should still be on the shelf near the stairs. I fumbled around until my fingers found it, and inside, miraculously, was a small flashlight that still worked when I clicked it on. The weak beam was enough. Sitting beside Isadora again, I held the tin under the flashlight's glow. The lid was stuck tight with age and moisture, but after several attempts, it finally popped open with a soft click. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were papers. Old papers yellowed with time, but still legible. My hands shook as I unfolded the first document under the flashlight beam. It was a birth certificate, but not mine, at least not the one I'd always known. This one bore a name that made my blood freeze: Marcus Thompson, born in Atlanta, Georgia, on the same date as my birthday. Mother's name, Sarah Thompson. Father's name, William Thompson. But as I unfolded the second document, the impossible became undeniable. It was an adoption decree, official and stamped. Marcus Thompson, age 6 months, adopted by Henry Ashford, a widowed physician of Savannah, Georgia. The child's new name, Wilder Ashford. My entire identity, everything I thought I knew about myself, crumbled in that moment. I wasn't Henry's nephew taken in after my parents died in a car accident. The story I'd been told my whole life. I was Marcus Thompson, adopted from complete strangers. The third document was a letter written in Henry's familiar handwriting. Under the flashlight's beam, I could clearly read, "My dear son, if you are reading this, desperate circumstances have brought you to this hiding place. Your father, William Thompson, was Chief of Staff to Governor Talmadge, a brilliant man who served his state with honor. But in 1952, he was accused of selling classified information, betraying military secrets. I knew William personally as physician for the governor's mansion, and I never believed those accusations. But your father became a scapegoat. He took his own life in prison rather than endure a public trial that would destroy his family forever. Your mother, Sarah, was left with nothing but shame and a baby whose father's name had become poison in Georgia politics. I offered to adopt you, to give you my name and protection. The Thompson name would have followed you like a shadow, closing doors that the Ashford name opened. Guard this secret, my son. There are those who would use it to destroy everything you've built." My mind reeled with the implications. Everything. My marriage to Isadora, my acceptance into Savannah's social circles, my business connections, even Dalton's pride in the Ashford legacy, all of it was built on a foundation that could crumble if this truth ever came to light. "Wilder." Isadora's voice was stronger now, concerned. "What does it say?" The flashlight beam trembled in my hand as I watched Isadora's face process what she was seeing. Her eyes moved from the birth certificate to the adoption papers, then to Henry's letter. I could see the moment understanding dawned. Her mouth opened slightly, and she looked at me as if seeing a stranger. "Marcus Thompson," she whispered, her voice barely audible. You're not really Wilder Ashford." I set the flashlight down carefully, its beam creating a small circle of light in our dark prison. "No, sweetheart, I'm not." The words felt strange on my tongue, as if I were confessing to a crime I'd unknowingly committed. "I just learned this myself right now, reading Henry's letter. I'm as shocked as you are." She reached out with a shaking hand to touch my face, her fingers tracing the familiar lines she'd known for decades. "What did Henry tell you growing up? What lies did we both believe?" My chest tightened as I recalled the carefully constructed story. He told me my parents were his distant relatives, good people who died in a car accident when I was 6 months old. He said he took me in because family should care for family. I never questioned it. Why would I? "And now," she asked, her voice barely a whisper, "now I realize everything I thought I knew about myself is a lie." I picked up Henry's letter again, my hands shaking. According to this, my real father was William Thompson, Chief of Staff to the Governor. But he was accused of selling classified military information, of betraying state secrets. I could see her face pale in the flashlight's glow. Accused? Henry writes that he never believed the accusations that William became a scapegoat. But it didn't matter. William Thompson took his own life in prison rather than face a public trial. His name became poison in Georgia politics. Isadora was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the magnitude of what this meant. "So Henry saved you?" He saved me from being the son of a man branded a traitor, but he also built my entire life on a lie. Our marriage, my business, relationships, our place in Savannah society, all of it exists because people believe I'm an Ashford, not a Thompson. What does this mean for us now? She asked, though I could see in her eyes that she was beginning to understand. It means we have something Dalton doesn't know about, I said slowly, the plan forming in my mind. He spent his whole life being proud of the Ashford name, building his investment business on that reputation. His clients are politicians, old Georgia families who care deeply about bloodlines and honor. A slow understanding spread across her weathered features. If they knew he was the grandson of William Thompson, his business would collapse overnight. No politician would trust him with their financial information. No elite family would let him manage their wealth. The very people he courts would turn their backs on him. And he has no idea, she breathed. None at all. To him, we're just inconvenient old people standing in the way of his inheritance. He thinks the Ashford name gives him the right to everything. This house, respect, social standing. But it's all built on Henry's carefully constructed lie. I looked at the papers scattered around us, then back at my wife's face. If our son wants to treat us like prisoners in our own home, maybe it's time he learned what real consequences feel like. The weight of 43 years of deception settled on my shoulders. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than helplessness. I felt power. Above us, floorboards creaked. Heavy footsteps crossed the kitchen, then moved toward the basement door. My heart jumped into my throat. "They're coming back," I whispered quickly, gathering the papers and stuffing them back into the tobacco tin. The heavy bolt scraped against metal, and suddenly light flooded our dark prison. Dalton stood silhouetted in the doorway, his expensive suit wrinkled from whatever he'd been doing while we sat in that basement for hours. Behind him, Arabella peered down with a mixture of curiosity and disgust. "Well," Dalton asked, his voice dripping with smugness, "have you had enough time to think about our offer?" I helped Isadora to her feet, feeling how much weaker she'd become during our imprisonment. Her legs trembled beneath her, and I could hear the wheeze in her breathing had gotten worse. The cold, damp air had not been kind to her condition. "Dalton," I said, letting exhaustion and defeat color my voice. "Your mother, she needs medical attention. The stress, the cold air down there. Please let me call Dr. Cross." Arabella stepped forward, her face brightening with what looked like genuine concern. "Oh my God, is she having another episode? We can't have her collapsing on us." "Just let me make one phone call," I pleaded, supporting Isadora's weight against my shoulder. "Dr. Cross knows her condition. She needs to be examined." Dalton studied us both for a moment, clearly weighing his options. A sick mother-in-law was the last thing he wanted on his hands. "Fine," he said finally. "One call, but make it quick and no funny business." He handed me his cell phone, watching carefully as I dialed. But the number I called wasn't Dr. Minerva Cross. It was one I'd memorized from a business card I'd kept in my wallet for 3 years. A lawyer who specialized in complex family disputes. "Fairchild and Associates," came the crisp voice on the other end. "Yes, this is Wilder Ashford," I said, keeping my voice steady and clinical. "I need to schedule an urgent consultation regarding a medical directive for my wife. Can Mr. Fairchild see me this afternoon?" Dalton relaxed slightly, hearing what sounded like a routine medical appointment. Arabella had already lost interest and was examining her manicured nails. "Certainly, Mr. Ashford," the receptionist replied. "Mr. Fairchild has an opening at 4 o'clock. Shall I put you down?" "Yes, thank you. I'll bring all the necessary documentation with me." I ended the call and handed the phone back to Dalton. "Dr. Cross wants to see her medical records and insurance information. I need to gather some paperwork and meet with her this afternoon." "Good," Dalton said, pocketing his phone. "Maybe now you'll start being reasonable about what's best for everyone." "Maybe I will," I replied quietly, helping Isadora toward our bedroom. "Maybe I will." 3 hours later, I sat across from Reginald Fairchild in his downtown Savannah office. He was a man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. I'd brought Henry's tobacco tin with me, and now its contents lay spread across his polished mahogany desk. Fairchild studied the birth certificate, the adoption papers, and Henry's letter with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining x-rays. When he finally looked up, there was something predatory in his smile. "Mr. Ashford, or should I say Mr. Thompson, this is quite remarkable," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Your son has built his entire investment business on relationships with Georgia's political elite, hasn't he?" "Yes," I replied. "His client list reads like a who's who of state government and old Savannah families, and they trust him because they believe he comes from honorable Ashford stock." "Exactly." Fairchild's smile widened. Well, Mr. Thompson, I believe we have everything we need. 1 week later, I was sitting in our living room reading the morning paper when the doorbell rang. Through the lace curtains, I could see a black sedan parked in our driveway. Expensive professional, the kind of car that meant serious business. Reginald Fairchild stood on our wraparound porch, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Behind him stood a younger man in an equally sharp suit, clearly another lawyer from his firm. Mr. Ashford, Reginald said with a slight nod, I believe we have some documents to deliver. The sound of footsteps on the stairs told me Dalton had heard the doorbell. He appeared in the hallway straightening his tie, clearly curious about our unexpected visitors. Arabella followed close behind her face, already showing suspicious concern. Can I help you, gentlemen? Dalton asked, stepping forward with the confident air of a man who believed he owned everything in sight. Dalton Ashford. Reginald asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. That's right, and you are Reginald Fairchild, attorney at law. I represent the legal interests of the actual owner of this property. He opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency and withdrew a thick manila envelope. This is for you. Dalton took the envelope with obvious confusion, tearing it open with casual arrogance. I watched his face as he began to read, saw the exact moment when confusion transformed into disbelief, then into something approaching panic. Eviction notice, he sputtered, his voice cracking. What the hell is this supposed to mean? Arabella snatched the papers from his hands, her eyes scanning the legal language with growing alarm. This says the house belongs to Wilder, not you. This says our deed of gift. She looked up, face pale. Fraudulent. I'm afraid so, Reginald replied with professional calm. Our investigation has revealed that the document you presented as a legitimate transfer of ownership is in fact a rather poorly executed forgery. The notary whose seal appears on your papers died 2 years before the alleged signing date. That's impossible, Dalton said, but his voice lacked conviction. What's more concerning, Reginald continued, his voice taking on a sharper edge, is that this attempted fraud raises serious questions about your family's legal standing in this community. Questions that might require a full public investigation into your genealogical background, your true heritage, your right to use the Ashford name in your business dealings. The color drained completely from Dalton's face. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the kind of investigation that makes front-page news in the Savannah Morning News, Mr. Ashford. The kind that your business partners and clients tend to read over their morning coffee. The kind that raises uncomfortable questions about bloodlines and family honor. Arabella grabbed Dalton's arm, her fingernails digging into his expensive suit jacket. What genealogical background? You have 30 days to vacate the premises, Reginald concluded, snapping his briefcase shut. As the lawyers walked back to their sedan, I noticed Dalton's hands were shaking as he pulled out his cell phone. My business partners, he said, his voice hollow. They're going to start asking questions. 3 days later, our living room was packed with people I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. Dalton had called an emergency family meeting, and the urgency in his voice had brought them all running. Cousin Peter sat stiffly on our antique sofa, his wife Mary beside him clutching her purse like a shield. 2 of Dalton's business partners, men in expensive suits who usually treated me with polite deference, occupied the wing-back chairs near the fireplace. The atmosphere was thick with tension and barely concealed panic. I could see it in Dalton's face, the way his hands trembled slightly as he paced back and forth in front of Henry's old mahogany bookshelf. Arabella sat perched on the edge of an ottoman, her usual composure cracked like a broken mirror. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. Dalton began, his voice carrying that forced confidence of a man trying to convince himself as much as his audience. We're dealing with a family crisis here, a legal attack on our home, our heritage, everything the Ashford name represents. He gestured toward me with barely contained frustration. My father has been influenced by an unscrupulous lawyer who's filling his head with lies about property ownership and family history. At his age, with the stress of caring for Mom, I think he's becoming confused about reality. Peter shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. Wilder's always been sharp as a tack, Dalton. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we need to consider conservatorship. Dalton said the words tumbling out in a rush. Dad's making decisions that could destroy this family's reputation, tear apart everything we've built. He's believing conspiracy theories about forged documents and genealogical investigations. Mary leaned forward, her voice gentle but concerned. Wilder, dear, is this true? Are you having trouble with memory or judgment? I looked around the room at these people, some family, some business associates, all of whom had known me for decades. They'd seen me build a successful career, raise a son, care for my wife through her illness. The suggestion that I was mentally incompetent was so absurd it was almost insulting. "No, Mary," I said quietly, standing up from my chair. "My memory and judgment are perfectly clear. In fact, I'd like to share something with all of you that might explain why Dalton is so desperate to discredit me." I walked to the small side table where I'd placed Henry's tobacco tin that morning, knowing this moment would come. Dalton is right about one thing. This is about family history and heritage, but not in the way he thinks. "Dad, don't," Dalton warned, his voice sharp with panic. "You're going to embarrass yourself." "The only person who should be embarrassed," I said, opening the tin and removing the yellowed papers, "is the man who spent his entire life taking pride in a name that isn't rightfully his." The room went dead silent. I could hear the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the distant sound of traffic on Drayton Street, the sharp intake of breath from Mary. "My real name is Marcus Thompson." I continued, holding up the birth certificate so everyone could see it. "I was adopted as an infant by Henry Ashford after my biological father, William Thompson, was accused of selling state secrets and died in prison rather than face trial." Peter's face went white. Mary's hand flew to her mouth. The business partners exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their sudden desire to be anywhere else. "Dalton has built his investment firm on relationships with Georgia's political elite," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "His clients trust him because they believe he comes from honorable Ashford stock, but he doesn't. He's the grandson of a man accused of treason, and every handshake, every deal, every client relationship is built on that lie." The room fell silent as everyone stared at my son in disgust. 6 months have passed since that devastating afternoon in our living room, and the silence in our Victorian house has never felt so peaceful. The kind of silence that comes not from emptiness, but from the absence of toxicity, from the removal of people who brought nothing but tension and greed into our home. Dalton and Arabella left Savannah the very next day. I heard through Cousin Peter that they'd packed their belongings in the middle of the night like thieves fleeing a crime scene. Within a week, Dalton's investment firm had collapsed. His clients, those prestigious political families in old Georgia money who valued reputation above all else, withdrew their accounts faster than you could say Thompson. The scandal of his fraudulent deed, combined with the revelation of his true heritage, made him radioactive in Savannah's tight-knit financial community. They moved to some small town in Alabama, I'm told. Arabella found work as a receptionist at a beauty salon. Dalton, well, nobody seems to know what Dalton does now. He certainly doesn't call or write. For me, he simply ceased to exist like the ghost I once told him he was. But this story isn't really about Dalton's downfall. It's about what came after. Isadora's health has improved remarkably since the stress left our house. Without the constant tension, without Arabella's cruel comments, and Dalton's entitled demands, my wife has found a kind of peace that's allowed her body to heal. She still struggles with the effects of her strokes, but her appetite has returned. Her sleep is restful, and most importantly, her smile has come back. We've made some changes to the house. That basement where we discovered the truth about my past, I hired contractors to transform it into something beautiful. A bright, airy space with proper lighting and ventilation. It's become my personal study, lined with bookshelves and filled with comfortable chairs. Sometimes I sit down there in the evenings, not thinking about secrets hidden behind walls, but simply enjoying the quiet satisfaction of a space reclaimed. Our neighbor, Leopold Gray, stops by most afternoons now. He's a widower about my age who lives 3 houses down, and he's become something of a godsend. He helps with yard work, brings us vegetables from his garden, and most importantly, he treats Isadora with the gentle respect she deserves. It's funny how removing toxic people from your life makes room for genuinely good ones to enter. I've learned something profound in these past months. Family isn't just about blood or shared names. It's about love, respect, and genuine care for one another's well-being. Dalton shared my adopted name, lived in my house, and called me father for 40 years. But Leopold, who's known us for 6 months, has shown more true family spirit than my son ever did. The Ashford name that I carried with such fear for so many years, it doesn't define me anymore. Neither does the Thompson name I was born with. I am simply Wilder. A man who loves his wife, tends his garden, and has learned that the most precious inheritance we can leave behind isn't money or property, but the example of how we treat the people who depend on us. Henry saved me from the shame of my father's accusations, but in the end, it was standing up to my own son's greed that truly set me free. Remember, true wealth isn't measured in dollars or deeds, but in the love we give and the dignity we maintain, even in our darkest hours. Looking back on this true story, I realize I made a terrible mistake that nearly cost me everything. I spent 72 years living a lie, carrying the weight of a secret that didn't need to be shameful. Don't be like me. Don't let fear of judgment keep you from living authentically. The truth has a way of setting us free, even when we think it will destroy us. My grandpa's stories taught me that family isn't about bloodlines or prestigious names. It's about the people who stand by you when darkness falls, who care for you without expecting anything in return. Henry Ashford gave me his name, but it was Isadora's unwavering love and Leopold's genuine friendship that showed me what true family really means. This true story isn't just about inheritance or greed. It's about the inheritance of character we pass down to future generations. We can choose to raise children who value compassion over wealth, integrity over status. God knows I failed in that regard with Dalton, but perhaps sharing these grandpa stories can help others avoid my mistakes. The greatest lesson from this true story: don't wait for crisis to reveal your authentic self. Don't let pride and fear rob you of genuine relationships. The people who truly matter will love you for who you are not, for the name you carry, or the house you own. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt grandpa stories, and tell me in the comments, what family lesson has shaped your life the most? Your stories matter just as much as mine. My son-in-law gave my daughter pills every night. For months, I watched Emma slowly fade away from a vibrant kindergarten teacher who lit up every room to a hollow shell of herself. Thin, confused, moving through life like she was trapped in some invisible fog. Michael, the trusted pharmacist she'd married, swore these were just vitamins for her demanding job. But something dark whispered in my detective instincts, something that wouldn't let me sleep at night. When my suspicions finally overwhelmed my doubt, I secretly installed hidden cameras around my daughter's house. What I witnessed through those cameras that night left me so shattered I couldn't even form words. As a father, I need to know other protective parents are listening. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Trust me, you'll want to hear every detail of what those cameras revealed. Let me start from the beginning. I'm Bill Parker, 52 years old, and I spent 20 years working as a detective here in Nashville, Tennessee. Music City, they call it, though. There wasn't much music in my line of work. I dealt with the darker side of humanity, the kind of stuff that keeps you awake at night and makes you double-check your door locks. I've been a widower for 8 years now. My Calliope passed away when Chloe was just 18. That little girl became my whole world after that. I raised her by myself, watched her graduate from college, cheered when she got her teaching job at Riverside Elementary. She was everything good and bright in this world. 2 years ago, she married Blake Reed, and I thought I was losing her to the perfect man. The wedding was something straight out of a fairy tale. Blake spared no expense. White roses everywhere, a string quartet the works. He looked at my daughter like she hung the moon. Blake seemed like everything a father could want. He was a pharmacist at one of those big chain stores downtown, made good money, owned a nice house in Green Hills. More importantly, he treated Chloe like a princess. He'd bring her flowers for no reason, remember every little thing she mentioned wanting. "You raised an incredible woman, Bill," he told me at their rehearsal dinner. "I promise I'll take care of her." And for the first year and a half, he seemed to keep that promise. Chloe was happy, really happy. She'd call me every few days, bubbling over with stories about their life together. Everything seemed perfect. Then about 6 months ago, Blake started this new thing. He said he'd been reading about health and wellness, about how stressful teaching could be. He bought these special vitamins, little white capsules, that came in an unmarked bottle. "Dad, Blake is so thoughtful," Chloe told me over Sunday dinner. "These vitamins are supposed to help with stress and energy levels. He makes sure I take them every night before bed." I should have paid more attention to that phrase. Make sure. But then I started noticing changes in my little girl. Chloe had always been vibrant, full of energy, but over these past few months, she seemed diminished. She was losing weight, and not in a healthy way. Her cheeks looked hollow, her clothes hung loose. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, making her look older than her 26 years. Worse were the mental changes. Chloe started forgetting things. She'd repeat stories she'd already told me. She'd forget conversations we'd had just days before. My sharp, intelligent daughter couldn't remember if she'd called me back. "Are you feeling okay, sweetheart?" I asked her last week when she seemed particularly foggy. "I'm fine, Dad," she said, but her voice sounded distant, dreamy. "Just tired. Blake says it's normal." The vitamins take time to work. That's when the alarm bells started going off. 20 years of detective work teaches you to recognize when something's not right. And everything about this situation felt wrong. My daughter was disappearing right in front of my eyes, becoming a shadow of herself. And the only new variable was those damn pills her perfect husband insisted she take every single night. Something wasn't right with my little girl, and my detective gut was screaming danger. That gut feeling wouldn't leave me alone. I couldn't shake the image of my daughter's hollow cheeks, couldn't forget the distant look in her eyes. So I decided to pay closer attention to Chloe and her so-called perfect husband. The next Sunday, when Chloe came over for our usual dinner, I watched her more carefully than I ever had before. She used to bounce through my front door like a ray of sunshine full of stories about her kindergarten kids. But that afternoon, she moved like she was walking through water, slow and deliberate. "Tell me about your week, sweetheart," I said, setting down her favorite sweet tea. She looked at me with those beautiful blue eyes that reminded me so much of Calliope, but there was something vacant in them. "We talked about this yesterday, Dad. Remember I told you about the field trip to the zoo?" My blood went cold. We hadn't talked yesterday. In fact, we hadn't spoken in 4 days. Chloe called me every other day, like clockwork had since she was in college. "Right, of course," I said, playing along. "Tell me again." She launched into a story I'd never heard before about chaos at the zoo and a monkey that escaped. She told it with such detail, such conviction, that for a moment I wondered if I was losing my mind. But I keep a desk calendar old habit. I checked it later that night. No phone call marked down. Something was seriously wrong with my daughter's memory. I decided to dig deeper, but carefully. "Honey, tell me about these vitamins Blake has you taking. Are they helping?" Chloe's face lit up with that dreamy smile I was starting to hate. "Oh, Dad, he's so thorough about my health. Every night at exactly 9:30, he brings me 2 capsules with a big glass of water. He says timing is everything with supplements." "That's dedicated of him," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "He's really careful about it, too," she continued like she was proud of his attention. "He always makes sure I actually swallow them properly. You know how sometimes you think you've taken a pill, but it gets stuck. Blake has me open my mouth afterward to check that they went down okay. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. He checks your mouth. It's sweet, really. He says some people forget to swallow completely and then the vitamins don't work. He just wants to make sure I'm getting the full benefit." She said this like it was the most normal thing in the world. No husband does that. No normal, loving husband treats his wife like a psychiatric patient who can't be trusted with medication. "And how do you feel after taking them?" I asked. "Relaxed. Really, really relaxed. Blake says that means they're working. I usually fall asleep within 30 minutes. Her words were getting slightly slurred, even talking about it like the memory alone was making her drowsy. I started calling Chloe at different times, testing a theory I hoped was wrong. During the day, she was mostly herself, though tired and scattered. But after 9:30 at night, nothing. Straight to voicemail every single time. When I asked Blake about it during one of their visits to my place, he smiled that perfect smile. "She's out like a light by 10 o'clock, Bill. Those vitamins really help her unwind from all that stress at school. Out like a light, like she was unconscious, not just sleeping." I started watching Chloe more carefully during our visits. Her pupils were often dilated, even in bright light. Her speech was sometimes slurred. Her reflexes were slower than they should be for a healthy 26-year-old. These weren't vitamin side effects. These were sedative symptoms. My daughter wasn't taking health supplements. She was being drugged systematically and deliberately by the man who'd promised to protect her. I'd seen enough. It was time to investigate my own son-in-law. I'd seen enough red flags to fill a parade, but I needed concrete evidence. Suspicions don't hold up in court. Facts do. So I decided to get myself some facts. The next morning, I drove downtown and bought the smallest surveillance cameras I could find. Tiny things no bigger than a button with wireless capability and night vision. The kid behind the counter probably thought I was some paranoid old man. If only he knew. I waited until Thursday when Blake would be at the pharmacy all day. Then I called Chloe. "Hey, sweetheart, I noticed your kitchen faucet was dripping pretty bad last Sunday. How about I come fix it? Maybe that loose cabinet door, too." "Oh, Dad, you don't have to do that," she said, voice tired and distant. "Blake can handle it." "Nonsense. I've got nothing but time, and I like staying busy." She agreed, probably too exhausted to argue. When I arrived at their Green Hills house, Chloe looked even worse than Sunday. She was wearing one of Blake's oversized sweatshirts that practically swallowed her shrinking frame. "You sure you're feeling okay, honey?" "Just tired, Dad. Blake says the vitamins are still adjusting my system." She curled up on the couch with a blanket, even though it was a warm October afternoon. Perfect. She'd probably nap while I worked. I spent 2 hours actually fixing things. The faucet really was dripping. But while I worked, I installed my electronic eyes. One camera went behind the coffee maker in the kitchen, angled to capture the whole room. Another went on the bookshelf in the living room, disguised among Chloe's teaching awards. "Dad, what's all that noise downstairs?" Chloe called out during my second hour. Downstairs. The basement. I'd heard movement too, but Blake was supposed to be at work. "What noise, sweetheart?" "Blake's probably working out. He goes down there every day, even on lunch breaks sometimes. Says it helps him stay focused." Every day during lunch breaks, that seemed excessive. "Mind if I take a look? Maybe there's a pipe making noise." Chloe waved me off sleepily. "Sure, Dad. Blake won't mind." I made my way downstairs, expecting to find basic gym equipment. What I found instead sent ice through my veins. This wasn't a gym. This was a studio. Professional lighting equipment lined one wall, the kind you see in photography studios. There was a tripod in the center positioned to face an area arranged with bedroom furniture. A bed nightstand, decorative pillows. But the computer setup in the corner really made my stomach drop. Multiple monitors, high-end recording equipment, cables everywhere. This wasn't hobby equipment. This was professional-grade video production. My hands trembled as I installed the third camera in a dark corner, angled to capture the entire basement. Whatever Blake was doing down here, I was going to find out. I finished my repairs and said goodbye to Chloe, who was barely conscious on the couch. As I drove home, my mind raced. The basement set up professional equipment, daily visits during lunch breaks. It painted a picture I didn't want to believe. That evening, I sat in my home office staring at 3 camera feeds on my laptop. Kitchen, living room, basement. All quiet for now. But I knew that would change soon. Tonight, I would finally see what my son-in-law was hiding in that basement. That evening, I parked my truck down the street from Chloe and Blake's house. Engine off, windows cracked, just enough to let in the cool October air. My laptop sat open on the passenger seat, 3 camera feeds glowing in the darkness. Kitchen, living room, basement. All quiet, all normal looking. At exactly 10:30, Blake appeared in the kitchen feed. I watched him move with the precision of someone following a well-rehearsed routine. He pulled that unmarked bottle from his pocket, shook out 2 white capsules, and filled a glass with water from the tap. Then he walked into the living room where Chloe sat curled up on the couch reading a book. "Time for your vitamins, honey." His voice came through crystal clear on the audio feed. My daughter looked up with that trusting smile that had melted my heart since she was 5 years old. She took the pills from his hand and swallowed them with the water, just like she'd described to me. And just like she'd said, Blake watched her, carefully studying her face. "Open up," he said gently. "Just want to make sure they went down okay." Chloe opened her mouth obediently, and Blake peered inside like a doctor examining a patient. But there was something in his expression that made my skin crawl. Satisfaction. Like he was pleased with what he saw. Then he sat down beside her, wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and they watched television together. A normal married couple having the quiet evening at home. Except it wasn't normal at all. I watched the clock on my laptop screen. 10:35, 10:40, 10:45. At 10:58, Chloe's head lolled to one side. At 11:02, her book slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. At 11:05, she was completely unconscious. Blake waited another 10 minutes, probably making sure she was deeply under. Then he stood up and gently shook her shoulder. "Chloe, honey." No response. My daughter was as limp as a rag doll. That's when Blake's entire demeanor changed. The caring husband act disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. He scooped Chloe up in his arms like she weighed nothing and carried her toward the basement stairs. My heart hammered against my ribs as I switched to the basement camera feed. Blake laid my unconscious daughter on that bed I'd seen earlier, the one positioned perfectly in front of the tripod. He adjusted the lighting, checked the camera angle, and then started the recording equipment. What happened next will haunt me for the rest of my life. I won't describe what I saw in that basement. I can't. But I watched a monster violate my little girl while she lay helpless and unaware. I watched him position her, manipulate her, treat her like she was nothing more than a prop in his sick fantasy. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the laptop. Bile rose in my throat, and I had to lean out the truck window to keep from vomiting all over my surveillance equipment. Every instinct screamed at me to kick down that front door and tear Blake apart with my bare hands. But I forced myself to keep watching, to keep recording. Because this wasn't just about my rage anymore. This was evidence. This was proof of what this monster had been doing to my daughter for God knows how long. When it was over, Blake carefully cleaned up, repositioned Chloe on the couch upstairs, and went to bed like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just committed one of the most heinous violations imaginable. The evidence was all there on my hard drive now. Video proof of systematic drugging and assault. But having the evidence and knowing what to do with it were two different things. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Blake's hands on my unconscious daughter. By sunrise, I was already dressed and heading to the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department with a hard drive full of evidence that would destroy a monster. Detective Amy Clark was just settling in with her morning coffee when I knocked on her office door. Amy and I had worked together for 5 years before I retired, and she was one of the best investigators I'd ever known. Sharp, thorough, and most importantly, she gave a damn about victims. "Bill Parker," she said, looking up with surprise. "What brings you here so early? You look like hell." "Amy, I need your help. It's about my daughter." Her expression shifted immediately from casual to concerned. "Sit down. Tell me everything." I laid it all out for her. The changes in Chloe, the mysterious vitamins, my surveillance operation, and finally the horrific footage from last night. Amy's face grew darker with every detail. When I showed her the video evidence on my laptop, she had to pause it halfway through and step outside for air. When she came back, her jaw was set with the kind of determination I remembered from our toughest cases. "Jesus Christ, Bill. How long has this been going on?" "At least 6 months that I know of. Probably longer." My voice cracked. My little girl doesn't even know what's been happening to her. Amy pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. This footage is solid evidence, but we need to catch him in the act with officers present. We need to build an airtight case that'll put this bastard away for decades." "What do you have in mind?" "A controlled operation. We get Chloe to cooperate. She pretends to take the pills but doesn't actually swallow them. We have units positioned around the house, recording everything. The moment Blake makes his move, we have him." The thought of putting Chloe through that made my stomach turn. "She'll have to know the truth about what he's been doing." "Not all of it," Amy said gently. "We tell her enough to get her cooperation, but we don't traumatize her with details she doesn't need to hear. Not yet." That afternoon, I sat down with Chloe in my living room. She looked so fragile, so trusting that I almost couldn't go through with it. "Sweetheart, I need to tell you something about Blake, and it's going to be hard to hear." Her face crumpled with confusion. "What do you mean, Dad?" "Those vitamins he's been giving you. They're not vitamins. They're sleeping pills. Strong ones. And while you've been unconscious, Blake has been taking advantage of the situation." I watched the color drain from her face as the implications sank in. "Taking advantage how?" "He's been recording you, honey. Making videos while you're drugged. We have evidence and we're going to stop him, but we need your help." Chloe was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, there was steel in her eyes that reminded me of her mother. "What do you need me to do?" Amy arrived that evening with a full tactical team. They positioned unmarked cars throughout the neighborhood, set up additional recording equipment, and briefed Chloe on exactly what would happen. "When he gives you the pills, hide them under your tongue," Amy instructed. "Act like you're getting drowsy, then pretend to fall asleep. We'll be monitoring everything, and the moment he makes his move, we'll be there." Chloe nodded, her hands shaking slightly. "How long has this been happening to me?" "We'll figure all that out later," I said, squeezing her hand. "Right now, we focus on making sure it never happens again." As darkness fell over Green Hills, our trap was set. Blake would come home expecting another night of violating my unconscious daughter. Instead, he'd find himself facing justice. Chloe had to see the truth about her husband. Tonight, we would catch this predator red-handed. The clock on my phone read 9:45 p.m. as I crouched behind the hedges in Blake and Chloe's backyard. Amy's voice crackled through my earpiece, calm and professional, despite the gravity of what we were about to witness. "All units in position. Parker, you copy?" "Copy," I whispered back, my eyes fixed on the basement window, where a faint glow indicated Blake had already turned on those studio lights. Inside the house, Chloe was putting on the performance of her life. Through the kitchen camera feed on Amy's tablet, we watched Blake go through his nightly routine. Same time, same unmarked bottle, same 2 white capsules. "Time for your vitamins, honey." My daughter took the pills with steady hands, but instead of swallowing them, she tucked them expertly under her tongue, just as Amy had taught her. She drank the water, smiled at her husband, and settled back onto the couch to watch television. "Oscar-worthy," Amy murmured into her radio. "Subject has taken the bait." For the next 30 minutes, we watched Chloe gradually succumb to the drugs. She let her eyelids grow heavy, allowed her head to loll to one side, and finally let the remote slip from her fingers. To anyone watching, she appeared to be falling into the same drugged unconsciousness she'd experienced for months. Blake waited his usual 10 minutes before approaching her. He shook her shoulder gently, called her name, even lifted her eyelid to check her pupil response. Satisfied that his wife was completely under, he scooped her up in his arms. "He's moving!" Amy's voice was tight with controlled anger. "All units maintain position. We go on my signal." Through the basement camera, we watched Blake lay Chloe on that bed, the same bed where he'd violated her countless times before. My hands clenched into fists as he adjusted the lighting, checked the camera angles, and powered up his recording equipment. "Steady, Bill," Amy whispered, probably seeing my barely controlled rage even in the darkness. "We need him to commit to the act before we move. Otherwise, his lawyer will claim he was just making a home movie." Blake moved around the basement with practiced efficiency, a predator preparing to feast. He positioned the tripod, adjusted the focus, and started the recording. Then he turned toward my daughter's motionless form. "Now," Amy's voice cut through the night like a blade. "Go, go, go!" The world exploded into motion. Officers emerged from their hiding spots, converging on the house from all directions. The front door burst open as the entry team hit it with a battering ram. Shouts of a police search warrant echoed through the neighborhood. But I was already moving toward the basement entrance, Amy right behind me. We'd planned this moment down to the second, knowing that Blake would try to destroy evidence, or worse, harm Chloe, when he realized he'd been caught. The basement door flew open just as Blake spun around from the bed, his face a mask of shock and terror. For a split second, he looked like the charming pharmacist who'd married my daughter. Then his expression twisted into something ugly and desperate. "This isn't what it looks like," he shouted, backing away from Chloe's still form. That's when I lost it completely. All the rage, all the protective fury that had been building since I first saw those camera feeds erupted out of me like a volcano. "Get your hands off my daughter." The basement erupted into chaos as officers flooded down the stairs, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Blake stood frozen by the bed where my daughter lay, his face cycling through shock, fear, and desperate calculation. "Step away from her hands where we can see them." Amy barked her service weapon, trained on Blake's center mass. Blake raised his hands slowly, but his eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal, looking for an escape route. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice shaking. "You don't understand what's happening here." That's when Chloe began to wake up. She stirred on the bed, blinking slowly as if coming out of a deep sleep. But I could see the alertness in her eyes, the controlled performance, as she sat up and looked around the basement with carefully manufactured confusion. What's going on?" she asked, her voice perfectly mimicking the grogginess of someone emerging from a drug-induced stupor. "Why are there police here?" Blake's face lit up with desperate hope. He must have thought his secret was still safe, that somehow he could talk his way out of this. "Chloe, honey, tell them," he pleaded, taking a step toward her. "Tell them you agreed to this. Tell them you knew about the videos." The transformation in my daughter's face was something to behold. The fake confusion melted away, replaced by a fury so pure and righteous it took my breath away. She shot to her feet like a coiled spring, releasing. "I agreed to what?" The slap that followed echoed through the basement like a gunshot. Blake's head snapped to the side, a bright red handprint blooming across his cheek. "When did I agree, you sick bastard?" Chloe's voice cracked with rage and pain. "When I was unconscious. When you drugged me every single night. When I couldn't even remember my own name the next morning." Blake stumbled backward, one hand pressed to his stinging cheek. "Chloe, please, you have to understand." "Understand what?" She advanced on him like an avenging angel, and I had never been prouder of my little girl. "That you turned me into your victim while pretending to love me. That you made me believe I was going crazy while you violated me in my sleep. I never meant to hurt you." Blake whimpered, all his charm and manipulation crumbling. "I love you, Chloe. Everything I did was because I love you. Love doesn't drug someone." Chloe screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Love doesn't violate trust. Love doesn't turn your wife into a victim for your sick fantasies." Amy stepped forward, her handcuffs already out. "Blake Reed, you're under arrest for sexual assault, administering controlled substances without consent, and production of non-consensual intimate imagery." That's when Blake made his desperate play for freedom. He'd bolted toward the stairs, shoving past one of the officers and making a run for it. But he'd forgotten that we'd surrounded the house. The moment he burst through the basement door, 3 more officers were waiting for him. The takedown was swift and brutal. Blake hit the kitchen floor hard, his arms twisted behind his back as Amy snapped the cuffs around his wrists. "You have the right to remain silent." She began, her voice cold as winter. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As they hauled Blake to his feet, he looked back at Chloe with something that might have been genuine remorse. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Chloe." My daughter looked at him with ice in her eyes. "Sorry doesn't give me back 7 months of my life, Blake. Sorry doesn't undo what you did to me while I trusted you." They dragged him out through the front door past the neighbors who had gathered to gawk at the police cars and flashing lights. As the patrol car pulled away with Blake in the back seat, Chloe finally collapsed. She fell into my arms like a broken bird, sobbing with relief and exhaustion, and the weight of finally knowing the truth. "It's over, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. "Daddy's got you now." As they drove him away, Chloe collapsed into my arms. The nightmare was over, but healing would just begin. 1 week later, I sat in a courtroom watching Blake Reed learn his fate. The judge's voice was steady and cold as she delivered the sentence: 22 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 12. He would also be required to register as a sex offender for the rest of his life. Blake's shoulders shook as the bailiff led him away in shackles. He'd tried to negotiate a plea deal, claiming temporary insanity, claiming he was addicted to prescription drugs himself. But the evidence was too overwhelming, the crime too calculated and systematic for any judge to show mercy. 22 years wasn't enough for what he'd done to my daughter, but it was something. It was justice as close as our legal system could provide. The real work began after the trial ended. Chloe started seeing Dr. Sarah Martinez, a trauma specialist who works specifically with survivors of sexual violence. Those first few sessions were brutal. Chloe would come out of the office with red eyes and shaking hands, processing months of violation she hadn't even known was happening. "The hardest part," she told me one evening as we sat on my back porch, "is wondering how many times it happened. How many nights I thought I was just sleeping peacefully while he was—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "It doesn't matter how many times," I said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "What matters is that it's over now. He can never hurt you again." Slowly, painfully, my daughter began to heal. The dark circles under her eyes faded as she learned to sleep without medication. Her appetite returned, and she started gaining back the weight she'd lost. Most importantly, the spark in her eyes, that bright intelligence that had always made her special, began to shine again. 3 months after Blake's conviction, Chloe made the decision to return to teaching. I was worried it was too soon, but Dr. Martinez said it was actually a positive sign. Chloe needed to reclaim the parts of her life that had brought her joy. "Those kids need me," Chloe said on her first day back at Riverside Elementary. "And honestly, Dad, I need them too. They remind me who I really am." Watching her walk into that school building, her shoulders straight and her head held high, I felt prouder of my daughter than I ever had before. She wasn't just surviving what Blake had done to her, she was thriving despite it. Our relationship changed too in ways I never expected. We'd always been close, but going through this nightmare together forged something deeper between us. Chloe started coming over for dinner twice a week instead of just Sundays. We talked more, laughed more, and somehow found our way back to the easy companionship we'd shared before her marriage. "You saved my life, Dad," she told me one evening. "If you hadn't trusted your instincts, if you hadn't investigated, I might never have known what was happening to me." That got me thinking about other families out there, other daughters who might be living with monsters wearing the masks of loving husbands. How many women were being drugged and violated in their own homes by men they trusted completely? The signs were there with Blake if I'd known what to look for. The controlling behavior around medication, the memory gaps, the physical and mental changes that couldn't be explained by normal stress or aging, the isolation from family and friends that happens so gradually you don't notice until it's too late. If Chloe's story can help even one person recognize what's happening to them or someone they love, then maybe some good can come from our nightmare. 6 months later, Chloe is planning to start dating again. She's nervous about it, and so am I, but Dr. Martinez says it's another healthy step forward. My daughter is learning to trust again, learning that not all men are predators, hiding behind charming smiles. As for me, I've learned that a father's job never really ends. Even when your children are grown and married, you have to stay vigilant. You have to trust your instincts even when everyone else thinks you're being paranoid. Trust your instincts. Protect your family. Share this story to help others recognize the signs. Looking back at this true story, I realize how close I came to losing my daughter forever. As a father sharing grandpa's stories with anyone who will listen, I want you to understand something crucial. I almost ignored my instincts. I almost convinced myself I was being paranoid, overprotective, just another worried dad who couldn't let go. Don't be like me in that moment of doubt. When every fiber of your being screams that something is wrong with someone you love, listen to that voice. I wasted precious weeks questioning myself, wondering if I was imagining things, afraid of seeming intrusive. Those weeks cost my daughter additional suffering that could have been prevented. The hardest lesson I've learned. Evil doesn't always look evil. Blake appeared to be the perfect son-in-law, charming, successful, caring. He fooled everyone, including me, for months. Predators are skilled at wearing masks, at presenting themselves as exactly what we want to see. This true story taught me that the most dangerous threats often come wrapped in the most appealing packages. God gave us intuition for a reason. That gut feeling, that unexplained unease when something doesn't add up. It's not paranoia, it's protection. Trust it, especially when it concerns your family's safety. As I share these grandpa stories with other fathers and families, I always emphasize document everything. Take photos, keep records, gather evidence before confronting anyone. Your loved one's life might depend on your ability to prove what's happening, not just suspect it. If this true story resonates with you, if you've seen similar warning signs in your own family, please don't wait like I did. Act on your instincts immediately. Your thoughts and experiences matter to this community. Drop a comment below sharing your own story or the warning signs you've noticed. Hit that subscribe button to stay connected with more grandpa stories that could save lives, and please share this video with anyone who might need to hear it. Together we can protect the people we love most.